One change in the path can change the outlook of time itself. Going back and doing one thing, even stepping on a cricket, can change how things are. When you go back in time, it messes up the continuity. This is the missing. To start off, we're going to talk about the revision of the history of Sephiroth and Evercrisis, where instead of his heroic, you know, his heroic deeds are shown in the early versions of the Wutai War. This either goes way back even before that, or this is a different war altogether that's shown out Sephiroth's skill. And from what we've seen, we go the archipelago inside the first soldier story when you play as Glenn and you meet Sephiroth for the first time because Sephiroth is your captain. So that means it's probably in Midel. The war is probably in Midel instead of the Wutai. And the reason why I think this is possible is Sephiroth wasn't known until Wutai, until I mean even though he fought most of the war didn't get finished till Zack came in. But either way, Sephiroth was still recognized for his stuff. So there's probably a change in misdirection in this timeline. This is why I think it's the missing timeline. Because the missing timeline is this one. This still would follow the events of Crisis Core, because every part of the compilation's in it as well. But maybe in this revision of the timeline, Sephiroth finds his birth mother in the finds files on his birth mother, Lucretia Crescent, in this version, and this changes the outcome because it takes one change to make things differently. So I think it's a possibility that's the case. So Sephiroth's origin story has changed. He's already captain, and then when you see Sephiroth is actually really young. Sephiroth is like in pre-teen, middle school age, leading a group of adult soldiers in the war in Midel. So, and I say it's in the Midel because it's an archipelago, which is a part of the Final Fantasy VII Gaia's map as well. Maybe this, and then there's a dream where Glenn fights Sephiroth, where Sephiroth goes off, which is actually a dream where Sephiroth says, "You're my enemy because you're a hero." Because of that, maybe it changes instead of Nibelheim, something else happens. But we don't know exactly, or it's a premonition to come, because Sephiroth calls Genesis, so this is still within the Crisis Core timeline, but in this, what I call the missing timeline, maybe Genesis didn't desert, and that's why he called Genesis. But, again, we don't know. And that was only a dream Glenn had. But dreams are created by something. They're created by our psychological states. What we think about. Glenn wants to be a hero as well. And Sephiroth is known as the greatest hero of Shinra. His whole life is based on him being the greatest hero of Shinra. That's why when he found out the truth, Sephiroth went off and burned down Nibelheim, because he found out his whole entire existence is based off a lie that Professor Gas and Hojo led him to believe. Even though Professor Gas is the most noble, honest, upright of the scientists, he still kept the truth away from Sephiroth. And maybe to spare Sephiroth his feelings. But maybe this time, maybe Sephiroth figures out earlier, or Genesis shows a file to Sephiroth, and that's why Sephiroth is trying to call Genesis. So maybe Sephiroth in this timeline, Sephiroth, has signs of going off before going to Nibelheim. Has signs of wanting to betray Shinra and hurt humanity before Nibelheim, and these are the early signs. Because in the original Crisis Core, nothing really happened. He just said, "I may abandon Shinra," and then after that, you know, he just goes into the Nibelheim basement, the Shinra basement, to read the files of how he was created using thousands of experiments, thousands of dead experiments or encased experiments to make one perfect being. And that was the Shinra scientist Lucretia's son, the Project S, Sephiroth, the perfect project of Genova, the one that made it. Even Angeal and Genesis were failures compared, because the way Sephiroth was bred inside Lucretia's body before Sephiroth was born with the Genova cells. And that's why even Sephiroth have control of that. But I think in this version, Sephiroth has signs of going evil before before anything in Nibelheim. So that could possibly mean that there's already signs or Genesis, instead of recruiting Angeal and Angeal rejecting Genesis' offer to join him, he tries to get to Sephiroth, because you see Sephiroth in the dream calling Genesis. And that's when Glenn challenges Sephiroth, when Sephiroth's a lot older and not the pre-teen team captain of Soldier at that point in time. So Sephiroth's story has changed considerably as well. So maybe Hojo has found purchase in Sephiroth as a younger Sephiroth than he did later on. Like, Hojo pushed Sephiroth to his very being to be the best. Kept putting him down, making fun of the way he talks and everything, and then there's also Advent Children. We have not seen the Advent Children of Dirge of Cerberus. The reason why this is important to Sephiroth is we're going to be talking about Kadash. My theory is that we're probably going to see one of the remnants. We're not going to see futuristic Cloud with the Advent Children garb, though. With the costume changes and everything, and the gotcha aspect of Evercrisis, we might see it later on. We might see it as just an aesthetic thing. But what we're going to see from Advent Children, most likely, is Sephiroth's going to create a remnant separate from him. If there's 3 Sephiroths, it could be possible one of the Sephiroths is dead, and one of the Sephiroths in the missing timeline already died to a Cloud's hand. So he would create a Kadash, get Genova cells, map the Genova cells onto him like Advent Children, and come back as Malice Sephiroth. Again, that one's Malice Sephiroth, made out of the malice and hatred he has toward Cloud for beating him. So that means that Kadash will most likely be the one that comes back from Advent Children into the missing timeline. I don't think it's going to affect the original Final Fantasy VII Remake timeline that we're in. It hasn't affected the original as well. The original was untouched. It's only when Sephiroth came back in Dirge of Cerberus after Vincent defeated Weiss, Omega and Chaos returned to the planet that Sephiroth reformed another Kadash back into his system, goes back in time, mess up the events of Final Fantasy VII Remake. So that would mean that Sephiroth will have changed things. And then there's Dirge of Cerberus. Dirge of Cerberus is affected as well. Now, I think Square Enix is going to keep under wraps of Vincent Valentine's appearance, as well as Cid's. So we're not going to see a Vincent Valentine story where he fights members of Deep Ground. I think we're going to see the story of Spieth, but a lot better. We're going to see the full restrictors, the stuff we were supposed to see that was only on the online version of Dirge of Cerberus. We're going to see it in this Evercrisis, but in a much better storytelling of everything that's going to happen. And you're probably going to be able to play the Spheres, either Nero or Weiss, or any of the other colored Spheres, to fight the restrictors each and every time. Because they're in Final Fantasy VII, and the missing timeline has the original Final Fantasy VII within it, so that means they're trapped underground and fighting off restrictors like that, like it should happen. And the remake, that's changed because the G cells came early from Genesis, which that means Weiss and Nero are concocting plans to get rid of the restrictors, the only beings that are stronger than them. So I think it's going to be a story of the Spheres and how they came to be. And you might be able to play Weiss as a main character in this chapter for a Dirge of Cerberus. Because, like I said, I don't think they're going to try to show off Vincent or Sid. Not at all. Not right now. They're trying to reveal that at last. They're really trying to give a surprise to what Vincent and Sid looks like. So, I mean, it don't matter with Sid, but Vincent. So they're not going to do no Dirge of Cerberus stuff with Vincent. All the Dirge of Cerberus chapters are going to most likely be the story of the Spheres and how they came to be into the remake. Also how Chadley was able to replicate the Emperor, the leader. The Emperor Weiss the Immaculate, the true leader of Deep Ground. Especially after the restrictors are killed, Deep Ground gets to roam free and do whatever they want. And then there's Crisis Core, which Crisis Core is another anomaly altogether. Things have changed. There's a training mission with Angeal as Zack to become first. As for Zack, it's not Zack just finishing the Wutai War and get promoted because of the Wutai War. Angeal trains him. You even see a blue Scorpion Guard Scorpion weapon in that training simulator as well. So, to tie Dirge of Cerberus and Crisis Core in Evercrisis, I think what happens is this is how Deep Ground, at least the Spheres, the color Spheres, get the G cells a lot earlier than in the original timeline. So they were able to conquer and defeat the restrictors once and for all. Of course, still Scarlet commands Deep Ground. She could secretly be a restrictor as well, but a lot more lenient than the actual restrictors, the ones that were created by Vincent Valentine's dad, Professor Grimmar. Crisis Core is going to be they're trying to say Crisis Core is an important game. That's what Evercrisis is. Evercrisis is actually an Elseworld Final Fantasy VII before Crisis. But instead of happening in between Crisis and Crisis Core and the beginning parts of Final Fantasy VII, this has happened all over the timeline because this is the untouched timeline. This is the timeline that Zack lived through. This is the one that Zack survives and got sent by the Arbiters of Fate before the Arbiters of Fate's destructions at the hands of the main party, which also affects that timeline a lot too. So things are different. Like I said, if you go to the future or past or anything like that, you create other timelines. It doesn't change your future or what happens to you, but you'll create timelines. And in any fiction, that's why gods get angry at man for defying nature. We're not supposed to go back in time. We're not supposed to go forward in time. We're not supposed to stop certain historical events. If we stop certain historical events, something worse might actually happen and come of that. And Evercrisis is the Elseworld that was created because Sephiroth had messed up the remake timeline. That means they had to pull a Zack from a timeline before he died, and because they pulled that Zack from the timeline, even after all the stuff's happened, it's changed everything completely. Deep Ground's got the G cells earlier. Zack's obviously alive, but also this could also integrate Kadaj and the remnants way earlier than they should be. I mean, the fact that Yuffie was able to meet the Spheres and Deep Ground earlier. The fact that we saw Sephiroth already starting to turn to the dark side a little early. Even some dialogue when he was younger, he says that we shouldn't show mercy to our enemy. Which, yeah, Sephiroth, it takes his job seriously. But remember, Sephiroth is still somewhat a hero. He's actually a chill dude. He's the chill older brother guy before he went mad. He's not supposed to go mad till Nibelheim. But it's changed. Ever Crisis, I will say this again. Ever Crisis is Final Fantasy VII before Crisis Elseworld. And let me know what you think of this theory discussion. Let me know what you think Ever Crisis is. If it's original, because it's not the original. So, may the crystal bless you. Like and subscribe.